Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video, where the topic for this video is going to be the release of Vray 5 for 3ds Max beta version. Now, this is an early access and it's available to anybody who wants to join. So all you have to do is go over to Chaos Group, log into your account, and from there click on the join beta. That way you're going to be allowed access so you can test out the new features that Vray 5 is going to bring. Now, I had a chance to actually check these out, so we can showcase them over here so you get a better idea. So let's jump into 3ds Max and take a closer look at these features. So here we are inside 3ds Max 2020 with Vray 5 beta installed. Now the scene that I'm using is the scene from the Ultimate Vray Materials course, and it's just a regular or very basic ball shader, which is going to help me showcase some of the features that the new Vray 5 brings in. Now, before I actually start explaining a lot of these new options, I just want to mention that basically the Vray 5 at the moment as it is has a couple of key features. The first one being the material construction and the browser. So let's start from there. I'm going to open up the material editor, and I have the compact material editor open. So if you have the slate material, it's probably going to look something like this, but nonetheless everything is going to be the same. So I'm going to switch back to the compact because it's easier to follow along, especially when recording a video. And in here I have the first thing that's kind of different. Namely, if you take a look at here inside all of these small shader balls, you're going to notice that they're a bit different. The first thing that they reintroduced is whenever you're creating a shader and you double click, you get this preview window. Now, up until now, whenever you're creating something and you check it out inside the preview window, it's going to give you an approximation as to how your material would look like. Well, that kind of changes with Vray 5, because right now with Vray 5, it gives you a one-to-one representation, or it gives you a really good indication as to how your material is going to look like whenever you post it on something. So this now is no longer just a gimmick, so to speak, but it's actually going to show you how whatever that you're creating is going to look like. Now, that being said, let's see some of the other options that are added here for the material creation. To make it more apparent, I'm actually going to start the IPR. So I'm going to click over here, last VFB. And what you're going to notice is the first thing that changed here, or the second change that we are seeing, is that we have a different Vray frame buffer. Now, what this means is that they've redesigned it. So now the Vray frame buffer looks a bit different and has a lot of different options. Now, you can rescale the Vray frame buffer as you were able before, but what you're going to notice is that over here you have these two little handles on the side, and if you click on them and drag out, on this side you're going to get the history button, so you can save your renders. And if you drag it from this side, what you're going to get is you're going to get the other major addition to Vray 5, and that is the layered compositing. Now, this new layered compositors will let you fine-tune and finish your images directly in Vray frame buffer without the need to go to outside software like Photoshop to do your quick editing. But for now, I'm actually going to collapse this, and later on we're going to see how this thing works as well. So I'm going to collapse here, collapse it there, and just bring it in so we can just see the material. There we go. Now, I'm going to go ahead, check my settings really quick. F10 to go into my settings. I have Vray 5 beta selected. Go over here. Progressive, not changing anything else. For the GI, I have brute force and light cache, and that's it. I'm not going to change anything else. So click this off, and let's start off the interactive rendering and start seeing some of the changes that came with Vray 5. As soon as we click on the Start IPR, it's going to take a second and start giving us a really good representation of our shader. Now, since we haven't changed anything, we have just a regular neutral gray shader. And all right, now let's start seeing some of the main things that were added. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select this button and just assign a region to render, so we don't have to render the whole thing while we're just previewing, so we can get a faster feedback. Now, the first thing, which I think is a major thing that they've added, is they've added these presets on the side. So if you click over here, you're going to get a bunch of different presets for different materials. These are great if you want to just showcase something really fast. You're not going after photorealism, but as soon as you click on it, you get some really decent results. Now, it's, again, I'm gonna say it one more time. It's not the perfect, but for rapid development, it's great. If you want to get a better understanding as to how to create some of the more complex material, check out some of the videos that are on the YouTube channel, or you can check out the premium Vray materials course. Now here, if you change some of the other ones, for example, if you want brushed aluminum, or you want to have something like chrome, copper, you get a really fast way of adding those. So I think that these presets are the most used ones for your visualizations, the most common ones. They're limited, but very fast to be added. I will add just one thing. When you're going through these, and if you have the IPR open, be mindful if you open up the diamond one, that one has the AB number and the IOR change, so it can kind of slow down your renders, or it can even at some point make Max crash. And I'm saying this because it crashed on me. Be mindful if you're choosing this while IPR is running though. So any of the other ones will give you a very fast result. There we go. We can even go chocolate and looks pretty decent. All right, so I'm gonna go back to custom. Actually, you just go to aluminium and leave it like this. All right, so that's the first thing that they've added, is these preset options over here. Now I'm going to select both of these elements, the top and the bottom, and apply a new material to it. All right, restart the IPR. I'm going to change the diffuse back to something more neutralish, like gray, like this. All right, so next thing that they've added is something that I think is great and amazing, and that is the ability to add a coat layer without having to go in and do a basically a Vray blend material and use a different material for the blend. So if you just want to have a coat added on top of your shader or on top of your material, all you have to do right now is, again, we're just going to select this, scroll down, and you have the this option over here where it says coat parameters. You open this thing and you just have a couple of options in here. So you add in a coat amount. Maybe let's try this one. Goes from 0 to 1, basically the percentage of 0 to 100%. So 0.5 will give me a 50% coat like this. And right away you can notice that this whole thing looks like it has a glaze on top of it. And compared to using the Vray blend material, it's much faster and it gives off a pretty good result. Also in here you can change the glossiness of the coat. So if you want to have a more blurry one, you go to 0.5 and you get a very glossy. 0.8 will give you blurred reflections, but again, as always, whenever you're using blurred reflection, it's going to take a bit more time to render out. But as you can see, even when I'm recording, which is slowing down the CPU, again, the end results are very fast when you're using the coat layer or the coat amount. So if I bring this thing to all the way up to 1, It's going to be much more pronounced. And we can also even control how well that IOR is going to work for the code. So if I go ahead and increase this thing to even 2.4, it's going to be much more glossy like. And at the same time, if I bring it more towards 1, yeah, it's going to cover up just a very, very centric or central portion of the viewport, basically something that you're directly looking at. So I'm going to put this back to 1.6, and I'm going to basically turn off the code amount. So the next option that I want to showcase here is right underneath the code parameters, we have another option called sheen parameters. Now, this is a very interesting thing because whenever you're using this option now, it will basically make your shader look like a velvet shader. So it is able to render soft microfiber fabrics, like I said, velvet, satin, silk. So all of these can be done with just adding in this sheen parameter. Now, how does it work? Well, if I go in here and I change this color to something black, will basically mean that it's not showing up. Anything under black will give you this glowy effect on the corners. Now, if I'm actually going to go ahead and render out just one small portion, so it's a bit faster to see. Maybe try this side over here. Zoom in. You're going to notice that now on the corners, I'm slowly starting to see that fuzziness appear. Also, if I go ahead and decrease this to 0.6, you're going to see that this thing goes in much deeper and gives me more of this fuzzy effect. So if I go and really emphasize this, 0.1, let's write like this. So 1 doesn't actually show it that much. 0.5 will give me that look of the fuzziness. So by just adding in one parameter here, we can see how this thing looks like. If I go ahead and even further increase this, there we go. You can see that now I have a very, very similar to velvet material. Fuzzy, and I didn't have to change anything but just this sheen color. Especially if we go in and actually add color in it, you can get this sort of an effect. So if you, let's say you have a blue sheen color over, like, let's say the diffuse being something like more of a green color. There we go. You get this sort of an effect. If you pair this off with, let's say maybe adding in a bump map here and go with something like a noise map. There we go. 1. And just like that, if you control this thing a bit more, reduce the blur, maybe even this thing, maybe even make this thing a bit smaller. There we go. We get a pretty easy way of creating velvet materials without actually having to change a lot of these settings. So those are the two or the 3 major things that were added in directly in the material editor. Now, let's take a look at some of the other things that were actually added in. Now, while here in the frame buffer, one of the major changes that I actually saw, and I actually do like, is the addition to this button over here when it says IPR debug shading. Now, I'm going to select just one piece over here, maybe like this. And if I click and hold this thing, it will open up a menu of different options. So if I click on it, I will enable it. And as soon as I enable it, you're going to notice that everything else just became black. So especially if I turn this thing off, you can see that now the only thing that is being rendered is what I have selected, or isolate selected. You can also isolate locked selection, or you can scroll down and just click on lighting. Now if you click on lighting, this will only give you the lighting path for the entire scene. It will not give you any of the information coming from the material. So you're only getting the lighting. You can see directly just the ambient occlusion, but before I do that, let's just select one smaller portion. There we go. Ambient occlusion will just show you where you're getting all of that information, or where it's going, which is really good if you want to try to debug or troubleshoot your scene to see maybe where you're having some issues with the scene. There we go. And you can also go ahead and use a wireframe render, which is great, especially if you want to showcase a wireframe of your model, so you don't have to go ahead and use a Vray edges texture in order to get this. Now you can go ahead and directly use this. It's a wireframe. You can also see the normals. There we go, the world normals. And the last one being the UVs. Now this is great because you don't have to check manually where you have the UVs for your model. It will give you a different color, and it will tell you where you've cut your UVs, as you can see over here. So all in all, not a bad thing to have, and it's going to help you get through your renders a bit more efficiently. Another thing I want to show you guys is the addition of this button on the side, where if you click it, it says Vray Asset Browser. Now, by clicking this is the new addition to the Vray 5. So on the side in here, you have a list of different materials. So by clicking on it, you get something like this. So all of these materials are ready to be used. Disclaimer though, when you download Vray 5, it will not come packed with the installer, but instead you're gonna have to download, I think it was about 3 gigabytes of textures and materials, so be mindful on that. Now, what I'm gonna do is select both of these objects like this, restart my IPR, and for example, if I like, let's say, maybe I like this brick sample, I can right click on it and add to selected object. So since we have both of those selected, we should instantly see it over here. And there we go. A very, very fast way of adding pre-made materials from the library. If you go down here, you have the car paint materials. You have ceramic, porcelain. Some of these are actually really useful and can be really interesting to use, especially if you take the tileable ones like these. And if you don't like the actual size of these, what you do is, again, just open up any of these materials, take the material picker, open it up, and this will open the actual material. This will give you all of the maps that are being used. So in here, we can actually see that we have a color correction on top of this, Vray bitmap, and in here, all you have to do is scroll down and change the tiling. So if you don't like the tiling like this, maybe go like 5x5. But also at the same time, make sure that if you're changing the tiling in here, you go in and change it in the bump as well. So there we go, 5x5. And just like that, you get this type of a material right away without having to change anything else. Concrete works well. Let's try it on the floor. Right click, add to selected object. There we go. We can see it on the floor. So all of these are materials that are very commonly used into your visualization. So if you're doing ArcViz, they can be a real time saver. Also, there is some interesting materials in here that are actually quite fun to use. especially the emissive ones. There we go. You have a shadow catcher. So do yourself a favor. Download Vray 5. Go in and play around with all of these materials, because they can be very, very interesting and give you some really interesting end results. For example, even something like this. If you go and sample this, and in here, just click on compensate camera exposure, you basically get a very interesting light without having to do pretty much any work. So if we go in, increase this, there you go. We just got a pretty strong light coming or being emitted from this material. We have emissive materials, we have fabrics, foams. Here is another one. Let's test out fabric. There we go. And you get the idea. Very, very simple addition to all of these materials, and this can greatly increase the speed as to which you're doing your visualizations or your final renders. So with this, actually think you guys get the idea. So just go over all of these, check them out, and test them in. So now, the next thing I want to show you is the light mixer. So this will actually allow you, or this option that comes with Vray 5 will allow you to explore multiple lighting scenarios from a single render. What this means is simple. What I'm going to do is take this, put it to the side, select both of these, and just give it a different material. Make it something like a gray one. There we go. I'm actually going to stop the renderer. I have a couple of lights in the scene, so I'm going to go ahead and just turn these on. So this one actually has red, this one is green, and this one is blue. So I have the RGB covered. There we go. So let's restart and see how this thing looks. There we go. So we have all of this being lit up on our model. Now, in order to get the light mix, what we need to do is we need to open up our settings. So F10 in 3ds Max, go over to render elements, and in here just drop down to add, and in here go to Vray light mix. Now this is the new addition to Vray 5, like I said. So when you put this thing on in your render elements, if you open up your frame buffer and you expand it over on this side, you get this layers option in here. Now, if I go in and restart the interactive rendering, I get the option to go into source where it says RGB, and here you have this light mix. Now this light mix will basically allow you to change all of the lights that you have in your scene on the fly, and they're named respectively. So I have the HDRI and I have the Vray light 1, 2, and 3. So if I go ahead and increase this to something like maybe 3, you're gonna notice that as I'm doing it, in the background the green color got a lot brighter. If I go over here and increase this thing, on the side I can see that the red color got brighter. This thing, 3, the blue color got brighter. So by just changing these settings, I don't have to re-render the entire image, but I can change all of these elements on the fly. And here is another very interesting thing. Let's say, for example, you don't want to have this light. All you have to do is just click it off, and it's no longer emitting light. By just doing this, there we go. You're no longer having to re-render the entire scene because you just added in a certain light that you don't like, or you want to change how it looks like. You can, again, bring it down back to 1 by 1 by 1. Reintroduce them individually, and that is a great time saver, especially if you've forgotten to basically untick a certain light in your scene before you let your final render finish rendering. And with that, the only thing that's left that we haven't actually showed is the layer compositing. Now this is another key feature of Vray 5, and that is the ability, when you go over here above we have the layers, you can click on top of here, create a layer, and you can start adding in different layers. For example, if you want to change the exposure of the entire thing, just click on exposure, and now you can change how this image looks like. So just like you would have this inside Photoshop, you can do it here on the fly. You don't have to go to Photoshop. If you want to increase the contrast, decrease the contrast, highlights, and you can even change the same thing you would do inside Photoshop. You can change the blend mode. So if you want to have it override, average out, and honestly, it's a really good addition. And you can again put white balance. You can change the opacity. There we go. It's going to change the way that the light looks. And also you can turn them on or off depending on what you want to have as a final result. So, like I said, another very interesting thing is the layer compositing, and this is how you do it. Just go in, add whatever sort of a render you want or whatever layer you want, and depending on where they are, so you can just move it on top of each other, just like you would do inside Photoshop, and that is how they're going to affect the final look depending on their hierarchy. And with this, we're actually finished with this video. So I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something new. If you enjoyed the video, then click the like button, and also if you're not subscribed, now is a great time to do so. If you would like to support me and the channel, the support links are below in the description of the video. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye bye.